hope it was a nice 3 weeks off for everyone, but it's time to watch cars go round and round a track again. We're in Spa for the first of 2 back-to-back weekends before the summer break, and it's a sprint weekend. This place is another one of my favorites on the calendar, but this is also a sad reminder that we should enjoy this annual race while we still can, because starting in 2027, we're going to a rotating calendar, which, just a quick side note, it is absolute nonsense that this race won't be on the calendar every year. You get it. The sport's expanding across the world. We keep adding new tracks, and we're really at or maybe even over the limit for races in a year, so some are going to have to get cut. But tracks like Spa, Monza, Interlagos should never, ever be cut from the calendar. We have too many tracks that really aren't that great for racing and don't have the history and legacy that some of these tracks have. But I digress. So going to the actual race this weekend, this is the longest track on the calendar, and usually we get a one-stop strategy. But we have a unique tire choice by Pirelli for this weekend. They're going with the C1, C3, and C4. Last year we saw the C2, C3, and C4, so it's really just a change to the hard tire. But it's the first time we haven't had 3 consecutive tire compounds since the 2022 Australian Grand Prix. And the thought is these compounds should push teams towards a 2-stop strategy, which we all know adds more excitement on Sunday. Except for one small little detail. It's probably going to rain this weekend. And even when rain isn't in the forecast, it's still not a surprise when random showers pop up. But as of now, we have an 80% chance of rain for Sunday. So this grand scheme by the FIA and Pirelli to mix things up probably won't matter anyways. But we do still have the rain to give us some unexpected twists, and there's really a very high chance for a safety car already here, so you never know what can happen on Sunday. For the weekend, though, I expect the McLaren dominance to continue. They're bringing a new floor upgrade this weekend, and they've tested this new floor in Silverstone, so they do have some data to back up the change. But the timing of this upgrade really tells me a lot about their confidence. This is a sprint weekend. There's one practice session to fine-tune the car. Now, of course, you can make changes in between the sprint race and qualifying on Saturday, but it's still a much bigger risk than bringing an upgrade on a normal race weekend. But with how confident the team is about bringing this upgrade this weekend, I'm also confident that it's going to give them a boost in performance. But the better question might be, which driver does this upgrade favor? It was very well documented at the beginning of the season when Oscar was on a hot streak of winning races that McLaren made some setup changes to the car that favored his driving style more. But their most recent upgrades have favored Lando's driving style more, which is likely part of the reason why we've seen him doing so well the last few races. I do think we're going to get a repeat of Silverstone this weekend, where these two are just miles down the road from the rest. So the biggest factor in deciding the winner on Sunday might just be who adapts to the new floor better. But it's probably going to be close between these two, and we still might get some fireworks. I went through the numbers just to see how close it really has been between these two this season. Added up the cumulative differences in timing between the races and qualifying, and it's insane. In races, Oscar has had the edge by 1.152 seconds. In qualifying, he's had the edge over Lando by 0.619 seconds. Now, of course, that's not counting the qualifying in Jeddah where Lando crashed and didn't put in a Q3 time, and it's also not counting the Canada crash where Lando didn't finish the race, so the splits could be more favorable to Oscar. But to have margins that slim after 12 races is just absolutely bonkers. So I think unless we get something very unexpected, there's a very good chance we see both of them back on the podium. But who's going to be on the top step? Is it Lando closing that championship gap to his teammate? Or is it Oscar getting some of that lead back? Now, McLaren's not the only one with upgrades this weekend. Ferrari is bringing their long-awaited new rear suspension. There's been a lot of talk about this upgrade because it's expected to solve all of Ferrari's problems. Well, most of them. The old suspension looks like it was the biggest culprit to the team's struggles so far this season. With that old suspension, we've talked about it, but they just had to run the car higher than its optimal ride height so they wouldn't wear down the skid block and get disqualified like they did in China. But they compromised so much performance by doing this. And really, knowing this, it's a surprise that even with this issue, Ferrari was still able to put in the results they did and end up second in the constructor standings at the halfway point of the season. I do think this new upgrade does a lot for Ferrari, but just not to the point where we can expect them to catch McLaren in either of the championship standings. This should close the gap a little bit. Don't get me wrong there, but McLaren still has this huge advantage with their ability to save and manage tires, and Ferrari still lacks anything to match that. But I think the much more realistic expectation is that this upgrade just cements Ferrari as the second best team ahead of Mercedes and Red Bull. And it might put them in play to win a few races this year. McLaren's been on another level, but we still have tracks coming up like Monza, Mexico City, Vegas, where we have these long straights that favor Ferrari a lot more than McLaren. For this weekend, though, there is still some hope for the team in red. You never know what can happen with the rain. You never know if we get another McLaren incident. And this is another track like Silverstone where Lewis has done pretty well. He, of course, won the race last year thanks to a disqualification for his teammate, but he's finished in the top 4 every year since 2015, other than in 2022 when he crashed out. More mixed results for his teammate Charles Leclerc, but he did win here in 2019 and finished 3rd the last 2 races. So we might need some chaos to see a Ferrari win, but it's definitely not out of the picture to see them on the podium. It's a very different race weekend for Red Bull. The first time in the team's history they'll go into a race weekend without Christian Horner at the helm. Laurent Mekies, of course, comes over from Racing Bulls to lead the team for the foreseeable future. It'll be very interesting to see how he handles this role. He's got a lot of experience in the sport, so that should go a long way. And his time as team principal of Racing Bulls has been very successful. That team has definitely outperformed everyone's expectations. But at the same time, this is uncharted territory for Mekies. He's never been in charge of a top team like this, where the spotlight is really on you. He's never had to manage the top driver in the sport and convince him that, hey, everything's going to be okay. You should probably stay with the team. He's never had to deal with a second car that's completely undrivable to anyone not named Max Verstappen. I think he's up for the challenge, though. And I think, if anything, this will be the dawn of a completely new era for Red Bull. They've had their success over the years, and they hope that'll continue with Mekies, but the last 2 years have just been plagued by controversy after controversy, headline after headline, departure after departure. It's been a very unstable and somewhat toxic environment, and I think that'll be the biggest thing that changes. There's obviously a rift between Helmut Marko and the Verstappens on one side and Christian Horner on the other side that really divided the team. So now that Christian's out of the picture, it should help bring some unity and togetherness back to the team that we really haven't seen in a while. But the biggest challenge for Mekies will be getting a handle on this car and getting it back to a championship level. Fortunately for him, though, some of that pressure of that challenge has been alleviated because it looks like the Max to Mercedes rumors are dead for now. Toto Wolff came out and said George Russell and Kimi Antonelli are the priority for 2026, and we shouldn't expect any surprise announcements. I was honestly shocked to hear this news. I thought it was a certainty we were going to see Max to Mercedes in the coming weeks, but even Max has changed his tune. For years, it's been, I don't want to race in F1 forever. I want to race in other series. I want to spend time with my family. But then he shows up this weekend, and now he's saying he's committed to the team in the long term. He wants to race for years to come. He wants to finish his career with Red Bull. It makes you think maybe there really was a significant amount of tension between Max and Horner, and now that Horner's gone, Max feels a lot more hopeful about the team's future. Or maybe the exit clause in his contract wasn't as close to being triggered as we thought, and now Max needs to put on his PR face for a little while longer. As of now, Mercedes still hasn't signed George or Kimi to new deals. When they do sign, which we should expect according to Toto Wolff, the terms of those contracts will be very telling. If both drivers get multi-year deals, it should be pretty obvious that Max to Mercedes probably really isn't in the cards. But if one of these drivers gets a 1-year deal, and they're in the same spot heading into 2027, this saga might not be over. Going back to Red Bull for this weekend, I don't know if we should expect much from them. Max is always great at this track. It's one of his favorites, so I don't think pole is necessarily out of the question. But over the course of the race, this car should struggle more than the McLarens and Ferraris, and maybe even the Mercedes if the weather conditions are right. It looks like Red Bull is running the same rear wing they ran in Silverstone, which is a little bit concerning to me. Max finished almost a minute off the lead in that race, so I'm just not expecting them to be that competitive on Sunday, especially with the expected jump from Ferrari with the near rear suspension. You might be a little more hopeful if you're in the Mercedes garage, though, and that really comes down to the weather. It's not just going to be rainy, it's going to be on the colder side compared to what we usually see at tracks this time of year, and we know that can be the magic ticket for Mercedes. But historically, they've been strong here too. Of course, it would have been a Mercedes 1-2 last year without George's disqualification, but they've won 5 of the last 10 races here. Let's talk some midfield teams before we finish up. Aston Martin and Racing Bulls are bringing their last big upgrades of the year this weekend. These upgrades for both teams are focused on aerodynamic changes, and Aston already got a taste of the first phase of this upgrade in Silverstone. These are really important upgrades for the midfield race, though. Let's be honest, Sauber has cemented themselves as the top midfield team since Spain, but Aston Martin and Racing Bulls haven't been that far behind, and they're definitely close enough to close the gap and maybe even get ahead of Sauber again. But after these upgrades, that's probably it for the year. So the performance of these upgrades will really have a strong influence on how the rest of the season plays out for these midfield teams. Going to Sauber, though, can they keep the momentum going this weekend? It's been 4 straight race weekends that at least one of their drivers has finished in the points, and I really like their chances to extend that streak this weekend. Of course, a lot of this depends on the Aston Martin and Racing Bulls upgrades and how successful they are. But even with that, this track has a lot of similarities to Silverstone with a mix of slow and high-speed corners and some long straights, and that's good news for Sauber. Am I predicting another Nico Hülkenberg podium? No, as much as I want to see that again, but they should be in the mix for points. Not expecting much out of Williams this weekend. The good news is this track should suit their car better than others, but they've just fallen so far behind in the development race. And we've talked about it. It was an intentional move by the team that they hope will give them an edge in the next few years. But surprise, surprise, we are getting a Williams upgrade this weekend. Apparently it's been in the works for months, so it still coincides with their early decision to shift their focus to 2026. It just might be too little too late. This is going to need to be a significant upgrade to bring them back into play as the top midfield team. I just don't see them making that big of a leap. You never know when you have Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon as drivers, but I just wouldn't bet on them finishing in the points this weekend, even with that upgrade. What will this weekend turn out to be for Haas? It's hard to say. They've been so up and down this year, but as of late, it really hasn't been great. Ollie Beerman hasn't scored since Bahrain. Esteban Ocon has finished in the points just 3 out of the last 8 races. Now, either of those stats probably would have changed in Silverstone if Ollie doesn't crash into Ocon. But on the bright side, that could be good news for them this week. And again, this track has a lot of similarities to Silverstone. So if they were on the verge of getting into the points that weekend, they should be on the verge of getting into the points this weekend. It's been a rough first half of the year for Alpine, but could this weekend be a little bit of a bright spot? With Pierre Gasly's P6 in Silverstone, I think you have to consider him for a points finish this weekend. And despite that car's struggles, he's really gotten the most out of it. Race pace is a completely different story. But at least with qualifying, Gasly's made it into Q3 more often than not, which is pretty surprising. So he could be in play for a top 10 finish, especially with the rainy weather on Sunday. His teammate Franco Colapinto gets another race weekend, which was a little surprising, but I'm worried he might just be a sitting duck waiting for the inevitable to happen. With him making it to this weekend, it makes me think he'll at least be in the seat next weekend too. But after that, we get to the summer break, and I'm really expecting a change to happen at that point. And I really think the team wants to put Valtteri Bottas in the seat, but his negotiations with Cadillac are preventing that from happening. But I don't expect Franco to finish in the points this weekend, and let's be honest, even if he did, it might not matter at this point. Some podium predictions for the weekend before we finish up. For Saturday in the sprint race, P3, I've got Lewis Hamilton, P2, Lando Norris, and P1, Oscar Piastri. But for Sunday, P3, George Russell, P2, Oscar Piastri, and P1, Lando Norris. Again, I'm expecting the McLarens to just be a step ahead of the rest of the field, but I think we see another close battle between Lando and Oscar in the sprint race and also in the Grand Prix. I think Oscar's going to come into this weekend extremely motivated and focused, coming off his recent win streak by Lando, and I think he comes out on top on Saturday. But Sunday will be a different story with the rain. Look, Oscar's not bad in the rain, but Lando's been a lot better in those conditions this year, and I think that'll be what gives him the edge on Sunday. I do think we're going to see a big jump for Ferrari, which is why I have Lewis on the podium for Saturday. They've already been in that range, but I think this new suspension will really separate them from Max and the Mercedes. But like Lando and Oscar, I think Sunday's a different story because of the rain. I do expect Ferrari to be close on Sunday, but I think the rainy, colder conditions are going to give George Russell enough of a boost to get onto the podium, which might be exactly what he needs for those contract negotiations. All right, that's a wrap on today's episode previewing the Belgian Grand Prix weekend. I will, of course, be back on Sunday after the race with a recap episode of everything we saw during the weekend. And I think I might go live again, probably on TikTok for Saturday's sprint race, so watch out for that. I like our chances this weekend. Whether it's the weather, whether it's the two McLaren drivers fighting, I think there's a good chance we're going to get some excitement and get a good race on Sunday and maybe even Saturday too. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and listening. Till next time.